Let me take you back to that Saturday morning. The city outside was draped in the gray-white light that comes before true sunrise, the kind of cold, pale luminescence that belongs to late autumn in the north. Inside, the kitchen smelled of dark coffee and something else, something sharper, almost sour, the invisible scent of secrets kept just barely below the surface. I stood at the counter, mug in hand, watching steam curl up from the cup in thin, restless spirals. My wife moved through the house in the way she had been moving for weeks, lightly, carefully, like a woman walking across ice she wasn't certain would hold. There was a brightness in her eyes that wasn't for me. I had felt it for months, the way you feel a winter wind through a wall long before you find the crack. I had seen the messages. Not all of them, but enough, fragments caught in the reflection of a screen she had not angled away quickly enough, a name that appeared too often, a laugh that rose too suddenly from behind a closed door. The name was Nick. I had never met him, but I knew him the way you know a storm before it arrives, by the way everything around you goes still and strange. I had not confronted her yet. I had learned, in the years of our marriage, that confrontation without evidence is merely theater, and theater, in matters of the heart, benefits only the one who has prepared the better script. So I waited. And I watched. And I gathered. Then came the honk. A single, sharp, brazen sound from the street outside, the kind of sound a man makes when he has no fear of the husband inside the house, when he believes that husband is already beaten, already small, already irrelevant. My wife's head turned toward the window and the faint smile that crossed her lips in that moment was not the smile I had fallen in love with years ago. It was something colder. Something that belonged to someone else entirely. She walked to me slowly, deliberately, and with a confidence that was almost rehearsed. She delivered her words like a woman reading from a script she had been quietly preparing for weeks. "Honey, Nick is already honking. Let's go, I'll introduce you to him." The name hit me the way a stone hits still water, the initial impact, and then the rings spreading outward, one after another, touching everything. My blood rose into my skull like floodwater. The mug came down on the counter so hard it cracked, a clean fracture running up the side, and my voice, when it finally came, was not loud, it was something far worse than loud. It was low, and steady, and ice cold, the way the river sounds in January when it is freezing from the surface down. "If he comes within 1 meter of this house," I said, "I will break his jaw. And if you walk out that door with him now, you will regret it for the rest of your life." She looked at me. Her smile did not waver. Not even slightly. She reached for her purse from the counter. She adjusted her lipstick in the hallway mirror, slowly, without haste, as though she had all the time in the world. And then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she said, "Then I guess I'll take that risk." She turned. She walked out. The door did not slam. It closed softly, which was somehow worse. Through the kitchen window, I watched her cross the driveway. His car was parked at the curb, a sleek black coupe, engine idling, bass notes thumping softly from speakers that cost more than they should have. He was behind the wheel with the window down, one arm draped lazily over the door, and even from a distance, across the gray morning air, I could see the arrogance of his posture, the slow drum of fingers on the steering wheel, the slight tilt of his head. He honked again when he saw her coming, longer this time, a sound like a proclamation. She laughed as she opened the car door. The coupe pulled away from the curb with a low, ostentatious growl of its engine, and then it was gone, and I was standing alone in a kitchen that smelled of broken coffee and cold air, watching the empty street where my marriage had just been openly, deliberately discarded. There are men who would have run after the car. There are men who would have thrown things, wept, called friends, called her mother, called anyone who would listen. I understand those men. I was close to being one of them. My hands were shaking. The cracked mug sat on the counter and I stared at it for a long moment, the clean fracture running from base to rim, splitting it into two halves that still held together, barely, out of habit. And then something settled inside me. Not peace. Nothing as gentle as peace. It was something colder and more purposeful, the quiet, absolute clarity that comes when the last uncertainty is removed. She had chosen. She had walked out freely, deliberately, with his name on her lips and his car at her door. She had handed me something I had not previously possessed, absolute certainty. I turned from the window. I went to the drawer. I had been keeping things in that drawer for 3 months, screenshots printed on plain paper, bank statements with certain transactions circled in red, GPS records pulled from the shared family account on a night when her phone had accidentally synced during a software update. Individually, each document was merely a suggestion. Together, they were a case. I spread them on the table and looked at them in the gray morning light, and for the first time in months, I did not feel the hot, disordered chaos of jealousy or hurt. I felt only the cold, methodical certainty of a man who knows exactly what he must do next. I dialed the number I had stored in my contacts under a plain, unremarkable name, the number of a lawyer a trusted friend had pressed into my hands 4 months earlier with a quiet, serious look that said more than words could. The call was answered on the second ring. I told him what had happened. I told him she had left with the man. I told him I had documentation going back 90 days. There was a pause on the line, not of surprise, but of assessment, and then his voice came back steady and calm, like a river that knows where it is going. "Good," he said. "That makes it considerably easier. Begin documenting everything from this moment forward. Keep every receipt, every communication, every timestamp. When she comes back, we will be ready." That night, while she was somewhere in the city with Nick, laughing, perhaps, or lying in arms that were not mine, or doing whatever people do when they believe there are no consequences left to face, I sat alone at the dining table and I worked. I sorted documents into folders with labeled tabs. I cross-referenced dates. I organized the evidence chronologically, then by category, then by legal weight, each piece placed with the kind of care a man brings to work that matters. The house was very quiet. The lamplight fell yellow and steady across the papers, and outside the windows the city moved in its ordinary Saturday night rhythms, indifferent and distant. I did not feel sorry for myself. I felt, with a clarity I had not experienced in years, completely and entirely in control. She returned on Sunday evening. I heard the car before the door, tires on the driveway, the low sound of an engine cutting out, the particular click of heels on the front steps that I had heard 10,000 times before and that now sounded entirely different to me, like a language I was hearing in translation. She came inside as though nothing had occurred. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her perfume stronger than it should have been for a Sunday evening, and there was a faint, private smile at the corner of her mouth that she did not bother to suppress. She dropped her bag on the counter and stretched, rolling her shoulders back with the easy satisfaction of a woman who had spent the weekend exactly as she had planned to. "Miss me?" she asked lightly, and the words fell into the silent kitchen like stones into deep water. I said nothing. I looked at her. I let the silence work. She began to talk, about a girl's weekend, about friends I knew she had not seen, about restaurants and shopping and long conversations over wine. Every word was a lie she hadn't even troubled herself to make convincing, and the boredom of her own performance showed through the seams of it. And then, with a smile that was more contempt than humor, she leaned across the counter toward me and said, "Nick thinks you'll calm down eventually. He thinks you're just jealous." Her laughter at her own words was short and bright, and it rang through the kitchen the way shattering glass rings, clean, sharp, and gone. I set down my glass of water with great care. I pulled the folder from beneath the table, the one I had spent Saturday night building, methodical page by methodical page, and I opened it and laid the contents out across the table in a single smooth motion, like a card player revealing a hand. Bank statements. Screenshots with timestamps. GPS records mapped across a grid, each location marked in red. Hotel booking confirmations paid with our joint account. She stopped laughing. The color that left her face went slowly, not all at once, the way daylight drains from the sky before a northern storm. She stared at the papers. "What?" she said, and her voice was no longer the voice of the woman who had walked out that door with his name on her lips and a smirk on her face. "What is all of that?" I looked up at her with the calmness that can only be earned through suffering, through the long, cold discipline of patience maintained under unbearable pressure, and I said, "Everything I need." You made your choice this weekend. Now it is my turn. The trembling started at her jaw and moved through her whole body the way cold moves through iron. She slammed her hand on the table. She threatened. She invoked the courts, she invoked what she would take, she invoked Nick as though his name were an answer to something. And I let her speak. I let her exhaust herself against the silence of the evidence laid out before her, the way water exhausts itself against stone. When she had finished, I said, simply and without heat, Nick doesn't know the law. My lawyer does. And with this evidence, the only thing you will be taking with you is the blame. She sank into a chair. Her voice broke into pieces. She spoke of mistakes, of confusion, of one weekend that meant nothing, as though love and fidelity and the long investment of years together were a ledger that could be balanced by the word sorry if it were delivered with sufficient desperation. I felt no cruelty toward her in that moment. Cruelty would have required passion, and what I felt was not passion, it was the clean, impersonal severity of a consequence arriving precisely on schedule. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She flinched before she saw it. Nick's name appeared on the screen, and beneath it, a message, 3 short lines that I did not read aloud but that I watched her read, watched the words move through her face like weather across an open plain. His message informed her that the weekend had been enjoyable and that he expected to see her again next week. Nothing more. No tenderness. No acknowledgement. She was, to him, a recurring appointment. The realization of that, the full weight of what she had risked everything to obtain, moved across her face slowly, like ice forming on still water. I stood. I gathered the folder. I looked at her one final time, not with anger, not with grief, but with the steady, sorrowful clarity of a man who has seen exactly what he needed to see. Enjoy explaining this, I said, to your parents, to your friends, and to the judge. I left the room. Behind me, the silence settled into the house like winter. The hearing came weeks later. She entered the courtroom composed, or attempting composure, which is a different thing entirely. Her clothing was careful, her posture deliberately controlled, but her eyes gave her away as they always had. She searched the room and found me seated beside my lawyer, calm and still, and something in her expression flickered and went out, like a candle in a sudden draft. Nick was not present. He had been served with a subpoena and had responded, as men of his particular character invariably do, by retreating entirely, disappearing from the proceedings the way a shadow disappears when the light shifts. My lawyer presented the evidence with the measured, unhurried authority of a person who has no doubt whatsoever in the material before them. The hotel receipts. The GPS records. The messages. Each exhibit was laid before the judge with the quiet inevitability of winter arriving after autumn, not dramatic, not theatrical, simply inexorable. By the 3rd exhibit, the judge's expression had hardened into the particular severity of someone whose patience has been tested beyond what courtesy requires. By the 5th, her lawyer was whispering to her urgently, and she sat with her head bowed, her composure finally and completely gone. The judge asked her if she denied the evidence. The question fell into the courtroom like a stone into a frozen lake, clean, final, irreversible. She opened her mouth. No sound came. And then, in a voice so small that the room had to go entirely still to catch it, she said, "No, Your Honor." Divorce was granted on the grounds of marital fault. The house was awarded to me. Spousal support was denied. It was over. She walked past me as she left the courtroom, past the man she had once loved, or had once said she loved, or had once believed she loved, and through her clenched teeth she said, in a voice meant only for me, "You'll regret this." I did not answer. I did not need to. Because in the moment she said those words, I could see in her eyes that she already knew they were not true, that the regret in that courtroom belonged entirely, irrevocably, to her. The weeks and months that followed brought a different kind of quiet to my life. The kind that is earned rather than endured. The finances settled. The house, which had been filled for too long with the low-grade static of a failing marriage, gradually became simply a home again, a place where the morning light came through clean windows and the coffee was brewed in peace. Friends who had watched the unraveling of our marriage from a careful distance began to speak to me again without the awkwardness of pity, and in their eyes I saw something that surprised me, not sympathy, but respect. The respect that people give, quietly and without ceremony, to someone who has been struck and did not fall. She, I was told by people who had once been mutual to us both, had lost far more than the court had formally stripped from her. The social currency of a life built on a certain image, the confident, untouchable woman who operated on her own terms, had collapsed along with the proceedings. The story had spread, as stories do in the interconnected geography of modern life, not maliciously, not as gossip, but simply as the truth, which requires no embellishment. Her family, who had always maintained certain quiet expectations of her, drew back into a cold and formal distance. And Nick, who had sent that final, careless message to her phone on the night the trap closed, had fun this weekend, same time next week, had by then retreated so completely from her life that he might never have existed at all. The risk he had represented to her was not the risk she had imagined. The risk, as it turned out, had been the decision to underestimate the man she had chosen to leave behind. There is a saying, old, and plain, and Russian in its bones, that a patient man is not a passive man. He is a man who has learned that the cold can be more powerful than the fire, that stillness can break what fury cannot, that the most devastating thing you can do to a person who expects you to collapse is simply to refuse. She walked out that door believing the story was over, that she had written its ending with her heels on the driveway and his engine at her back. But the story was not over. It had, in that moment, only just begun. And when the final page was turned, the words on it were not the ones she had composed. They were the ones I had been quietly writing, in the long cold mornings while she slept, in the careful hours while she was elsewhere, in the patient, methodical, unshakable discipline of a man who had decided that this time, the regret would not be his. That, I think, is the truest part of this story, not the courtroom, not the evidence, not even the moment the judge's gavel fell. The truest part is this: she offered me the risk, and I did not take it. She took it. And she lived, and will continue to live, with exactly the consequences she earned. I want to know what you think. Was this the right path, the cold patience, the careful preparation, the decision to let justice do what fury could not? Or do you see it differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because every story deserves not just a teller, but an audience willing to think it through. And if this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that endurance has its own kind of power, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Because sometimes the most important thing a person can know is that they are not required to break.